I stood outside the glass doors of the wedding venue, my shoes sinking slightly into the manicured lawn beneath me. You'd think I was just another smiling guest, maybe even a bridesmaid, based on my lavender dress and soft curls. But inside, my chest was pounding so hard I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. Because just 5 minutes earlier, my sister, Maris, looked me dead in the eye and said, "We don't want you here." She didn't whisper. She didn't pull me aside. She said it in front of 2 of her bridesmaids, like she wanted to humiliate me. I asked her, stunned, "What are you talking about?" Maris crossed her arms, not a hint of guilt on her face. "I just don't want the vibe thrown off. You've always been intense. This is my day, Lena. And I don't want drama. So just leave quietly, okay?" Her tone, her face, like I was some kind of party crasher. What she didn't realize, what none of them realized, was that I was the one who paid for the food. The entire wedding dinner, down to the cake and cocktail shrimp, was my gift to her. Thousands of dollars I'd saved up from working double night shifts as a nurse. She couldn't afford a venue like this, not without people like me stepping in. And still I was disposable. So I turned, slowly. No crying. No yelling. I walked around the side of the building to the back entrance where the catering staff was setting up. My best friend Tara, who owns a small bakery, was directing her team near the reception tables. She saw me coming and gave a little wave. I leaned in close. I remember how calm my voice sounded. "Tara," I said, "don't serve. Cancel the food. Tell your team to pack everything up and leave. I'll cover whatever you need." The bride just disinvited me. Her eyes widened. "Wait, what? Are you serious?" I nodded. "Very." She looked at me for a second, then at her team, then back at me. "Okay, you sure?" I said. "I've never been more sure in my life." And then I watched, in slow motion, as everything changed. The servers started quietly lifting trays back into the vans. One by one, the warming dishes, the buffet signs, the salads. All of it started disappearing. Guests were inside sipping champagne, posing for selfies, clueless that the entire dinner they were expecting was evaporating. I walked back through the side exit, not through the crowd, not to cause a scene, but just far enough to see it all unfold. It didn't take long. About 20 minutes later, a cousin shouted, "Hey, where's the food?" Another voice chimed in, "They're saying the caterers left." Maris's brand new husband, Seth, started looking panicked. His mother was trying to talk to the DJ, who was refusing to start because payment hadn't gone through. And then I heard it, Maris shrieking, "Where's the food? Where's the fucking food? We have 120 people here." A moment later, she spotted me near the hedges and pointed like I was a criminal. "What did you do?" I looked her right in the eye. "Ask yourself why the person who paid for it didn't feel welcome here." People turned. Heads snapped in my direction. The buzz of the crowd grew into confused whispers. And in that moment, surrounded by murmurs, clinking glasses and rising tension, I didn't feel petty. I felt free. Because for once I wasn't swallowing it. I wasn't pretending everything was fine. I was reclaiming something I didn't even know I had, the right to say, enough. Growing up in the Calloway household was like living in a photo shoot, always posed, always polished, always pretending. We lived in a nice suburb outside Charlotte, North Carolina. White shutters, tulip beds, a minivan in the driveway. It looked like any other house in the neighborhood. But inside, things were quieter. Not the good kind of quiet. The kind that makes you watch your words. The kind that makes you feel small. My mom, Diana, ran our family like it was a brand campaign. She was big on appearances. The right dress, the right lighting, the right smiles for Christmas cards. She wasn't cruel, not in a way you could point at. She was just strategic. If you fit the brand, you got love. If you didn't, you got edited out. My sister Maris? Oh, she was made for it. Blonde hair, big blue eyes, always camera ready. She was the kind of kid adults gushed over, bubbly, charming, perfect for pageants. I used to joke that she was born with a tiara on. She didn't just fit the brand, she was the brand. And then there was me. I was quieter, more serious. I liked books, puzzles, science kits. I never wanted to be in front of the camera. I wanted to know how it worked. I was the kid who helped in the kitchen, who bandaged the scraped knees, who cleaned up after everyone left. And I was okay with that, for a while. Because I believed what most little sisters believe. If I work hard enough, they'll see me. Spoiler alert, they didn't. It started small. Maris's birthdays were always huge. Bounce houses, DJs, full themes. Mine were sheet cakes from the grocery store. If I complained, Mom would say, "Maris just has a lot of friends. You like smaller things, don't you?" At school, I made honor roll every semester. Straight A's. No fuss. But when Maris made JV cheerleader, it was like she won the Nobel Prize. Dad bought balloons. Mom baked a 3-layer cake. And I just smiled because what else could I do? Even Grandpa Walter, my dad's father, noticed. One Christmas, he pulled me aside and said, "You know, kiddo, you don't have to be flashy to matter." He was the only one who ever talked to me like I was more than the family helper. By the time I turned 18, I had a full-ride scholarship to UNC Chapel Hill. I was the first woman in our family to go into nursing. No one came to move me into my dorm. Maris was doing a beach photo shoot that weekend for some influencer thing, and my parents didn't want to split the family. But I didn't complain. I learned to do things on my own, pay my rent, buy my scrubs, study on the bus between hospital shifts. That's just who I became. The responsible one. The invisible one. The one who got things done without a fuss. Fast forward 10 years, and I was working full-time in the ICU, dating Nate, a sweet, level-headed community college professor with the patience of a saint. He came from a totally different world. His family talked about things. They said sorry. They hugged without it being a holiday. When I first met his mom, she cried, just thanking me for being good to her son. I remember standing in her kitchen, blinking like she'd spoken a different language. That's when I started to realize what I'd grown up with wasn't normal. When Maris got engaged, I really wanted to believe things had changed. She called me crying, overwhelmed with planning, said she didn't know how she'd afford it all. I offered to help. I even pulled money from my emergency fund to pay for the food and dessert, not just because I could, but because I thought maybe, just maybe, this would be the moment we finally connected. We were adults now, right? Maybe old patterns could shift. I coordinated everything with Tara, my best friend from college who owns a small bakery. We arranged a full spread, hors d'oeuvres, buffet-style dinner, 3-tier cake, vegan options, the works. I stayed up nights going over menus and spreadsheets after 12-hour shifts at the hospital. Not once did Maris say thank you. But still, I showed up on her wedding day, believing this was a gift, not just of food, but of love, of family, of second chances. And then she looked at me and said, "We don't want you here." That's when I knew. Some people don't want to change. They just want you to keep playing the same part, even if it breaks you. The thing about dysfunction is, you don't always know it's there while you're living in it. It doesn't announce itself with shouting or slammed doors. In my family, dysfunction came dressed in pastel sweaters and polite smiles. It looked normal from the outside, and that's what made it so hard to call out. In our house, everything revolved around Maris. Her mood set the tone for the entire day. If she was happy, we were all allowed to breathe. If she was sulking, even the dog got nervous. I can still hear Mom saying, "Just let her have this, Lena." You know how sensitive she is. I heard that line so many times growing up, it became a reflex to fold myself in half just to keep the peace. But here's the thing. When one child is always protected from consequences, someone else ends up carrying them. That someone was me. When Maris failed her biology class in high school, I was told to help tutor her. I did, even though it meant staying up late and getting behind in my own coursework. When she got caught sneaking out to a party at 16, I took the blame for not watching her better. And when she crashed Dad's car, they actually asked me to apologize, because I'd set a bad example by being too strict. Looking back now, it was clear. Maris wasn't just the golden child, she was the family's emotional mascot. Everyone bent over backwards to protect her image, even if it meant cutting me out of the frame entirely. And then there was Mom. Diana Calloway doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't need to. She could ruin your day with a look, a slow blink, a tilt of the head, a perfectly timed silence that told you everything she wasn't saying out loud. She didn't punish. She withdrew, which, for a kid desperate for her approval, felt 1,000 times worse. She taught me early that love was conditional. You had to earn it, and even then, you might not keep it. Dad, on the other hand, was more like background music. He worked long hours as a finance manager, came home tired, and mostly stayed out of the emotional mess. He'd hand out money when things got tense, gifts, checks, anything to smooth things over, but never his voice, never his presence. I think part of him knew what was happening, but he chose denial because it was easier than confrontation. The only person who ever really saw me was Grandpa Walter. He didn't say much, but when he did, you listened. Vietnam vet, hard hands, sharp eyes. He used to take me fishing when I was little, not because he loved fish, but because he knew I needed quiet places to feel safe. We'd sit on the dock for hours, barely talking, and still I felt more understood there than anywhere else in my life. He once said to me, "There's strength in being steady, but don't let them turn you into a shadow." I didn't understand what he meant until I was older. By the time Maris got engaged, nothing had really changed. She was still the star. Mom was still the director. Dad was still the quiet bank. And I was still backstage, holding everything together so the show could go on. And when I told them I'd pay for the wedding catering, thinking it would mean something, they acted like it was expected. Like I was just doing what I always did, cleaning up behind the scenes so the spotlight stayed bright. Maris didn't even ask what the menu included. She just sent me Pinterest links and said, "Make sure the cake looks good in pictures." The day before the wedding, when I asked if I could bring Nate to the rehearsal dinner, Mom actually said, "Let's not complicate things." Complicate things? With my fiancé? The man I've been with for 3 years? It hit me right then. I was never part of the main picture. I was the frame. Useful, decorative, replaceable. They didn't value me for who I was. They valued me for what I could do for them, and only if I stayed quiet about it. So when Maris told me on her wedding day to leave, it wasn't just a last-minute insult. It was a message the whole family had been sending me for years. You're not really one of us. Not unless you shrink yourself. That moment hurt, yes. But it also gave me clarity. Because when a family forces you to disappear just to keep their peace, it's no longer a home. It's a performance. And I was finally done playing my part. The morning of Maris's wedding started deceptively calm. I arrived early at the venue, a picturesque vineyard draped in early spring sunlight, rows of white chairs lined up under a silk canopy, everything styled to perfection. If you didn't know better, you'd think we were one big happy family preparing for the happiest day of our lives. But underneath that glossy surface, I could feel the pressure building. You know when the air changes before a thunderstorm? That's what it felt like in my chest. I walked into the bridal suite holding 2 coffees, one for Maris, one for me, and found her surrounded by bridesmaids, hair curlers, and controlled chaos. She was already in her robe, sitting in front of a mirror, practicing her smile. "Hey," I said, keeping my tone light. "I brought your favorite." She didn't even look at me. One of her bridesmaids, Fallon, reached over and took the cup instead. "She's cutting caffeine today," she said with a little smirk. I brushed it off. This was her day, right? Not the time to take things personally. But then Maris finally turned to me, and she was frowning. "What are you wearing?" she asked, like she'd just noticed I had shown up in clown makeup. I looked down at my dress, a soft lavender, mid-length, nothing flashy, but elegant enough for the occasion. "It's the one I told you I bought. The one from the group chat?" She shook her head. "Yeah, but it's a little much, don't you think? You'll be in photos. I need the palette to stay clean. Can you change?" I stared at her, trying to process. "You want me to go buy another dress? The ceremony's in 3 hours. She waved her hand like she was swatting a fly. "Just wear something beige, something that doesn't compete." I could feel every pair of eyes in the room shift toward me, watching, measuring my reaction. I felt the familiar weight of expectations settle across my shoulders. Don't make a scene, don't ruin her day, just nod and obey. I bit the inside of my cheek and said, "Okay." Because I knew the drill. Keep it calm. Keep it quiet. I left the suite, found my bag, and changed into the plainest beige sundress I had packed, something I brought just in case. I looked in the mirror afterward and didn't recognize myself. It was like I'd erased my personality for the sake of someone else's comfort. Again, I told myself to breathe, that I could get through this. But I was lying to myself. Something had already cracked open. After the ceremony, which was beautiful, if you didn't know the backstory, people were mingling near the reception area, taking pictures, sipping champagne. I stood quietly to the side, watching from behind the camera. That's where I always was, right? Out of the frame. Then Maris came up to me. Alone. No bridesmaids. No audience. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "We don't want you here for the reception." I blinked. "What are you talking about?" She lowered her voice, but not by much. "You're just not vibing. You're throwing everything off. I want people to relax. I think it's better if you go now." It took me a second to realize she wasn't joking. "You're kicking me out?" "It's not like that," she said, folding her arms. "You're just heavy. You've always been heavy. I don't want that energy around me today." I stood completely still. My heart was racing, but on the outside I didn't move a muscle. "You mean after I paid for the food? After I helped plan this? After I changed my dress for you?" She rolled her eyes. "I didn't ask you to do all that." And that's when I knew it. It wasn't just a bad moment. It wasn't bridezilla stress. This was her truth. She didn't see me as family. She saw me as support staff, dispensable. She turned to walk away like the conversation was over. But it wasn't. Not for me. Because something inside me finally broke open, not in a loud, chaotic way, but in a clean, final kind of way. The kind of break that clears the fog and shows you the truth you've been avoiding your entire life. And for the first time, I didn't swallow it. I didn't shrink. I walked away, not out of shame, but with purpose. Straight toward the catering tent. Straight toward the only part of this wedding I had any control over. I don't remember walking away from the bridal suite. My feet moved, but my mind felt completely detached, like I was watching myself from somewhere outside my body. I passed rows of smiling guests, past the manicured hedges and champagne flutes and string quartet music playing something delicate and expensive. The kind of scene you'd see on a wedding magazine cover. The kind of scene I had helped build, and now had been told I didn't belong in. I kept walking until I was behind the reception tent. Alone. Finally. And that's when it hit me. Not just what Maris had done, but what it meant. This wasn't just about a dress or a guest list. This wasn't even about the food. This was about a lifetime of being treated like an afterthought. And I had finally, officially, been deleted. I sat down on the edge of a folding chair, right beside a stack of extra linens, and let my body feel the weight of it all. There's a specific kind of grief that comes when someone's cruelty doesn't surprise you anymore. You don't cry right away. You don't scream. You just sit there, realizing they meant it. That this isn't some misunderstanding or miscommunication. This is who they've chosen to be. And the first feeling that came wasn't anger. It was shame. I was embarrassed. Embarrassed that I thought this time might be different. That I had saved for months, worked overnight shifts, spent hours designing a wedding menu, all because I hoped, somewhere deep inside, that this would be the moment I was finally seen. I wasn't. I was useful. Until I wasn't. I remember taking out my phone to text Nate, but I couldn't even form words. My hands were shaking. My mouth was dry. My body felt like it was running adrenaline, but going nowhere. And then the sadness came. Thick, quiet sadness. The kind that doesn't burst out in sobs. It just leaks slowly, until you feel like you're being flooded from the inside. I didn't cry right away, but I wanted to. I wanted to cry like a child. To scream into a pillow. To curl into someone's arms and ask why. Why didn't they love me the same? Why did she get celebrated and I got dismissed? Why was I only ever enough when I made myself small? but I already knew the answers. And that hurt even more. I looked down at my hands, at the tiny cuts from opening supply boxes that morning, and thought, this is what I've done my whole life. Quiet work, invisible work, for people who never even say thank you. My breath started to quicken. I felt like I was drowning in this weight I'd carried for years. Guilt, pressure, rejection, all of it crashing down in one ugly, breathless moment. And then, something shifted. It wasn't a lightning bolt or some big epiphany. It was quieter than that. A whisper in the back of my mind. What if you didn't keep doing this? What if, for once, you did something for yourself? Not for revenge, not to make a point, but just to stop the bleeding? I stood up. I wiped my face. Not because I was done feeling, but because I was ready to do something with those feelings. This wasn't just about Maris. This was about every time I let myself be treated like a placeholder. Every time I mistook survival for love. Every time I mistook obedience for peace. That day, sitting behind a wedding tent with my heart in pieces and mascara on my hand, I finally understood something. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't too sensitive. I wasn't the problem. I was just tired of pretending I didn't deserve better. That realization didn't make the pain go away, but it gave the pain direction. And that's when I made the decision. Not to scream, not to argue, not to beg for a seat at a table that was never meant for me, but to walk over to the one thing I had paid for, the dinner, the food, the thing that kept this illusion running, and quietly take it back. Not to be cruel, but to finally make it real. Because if they didn't want me there, then they didn't deserve what I brought. After I told the caterer to cancel the food, everything felt like it slowed down. People think taking a stand feels loud, dramatic, but it didn't. It felt still, steady, like standing in the middle of a storm and realizing for the first time that you don't have to run from it. I sat in my car for almost 10 minutes before I could even start the engine. I watched the sunlight dancing across the dashboard and listened to my own breathing, trying to process what I'd just done, and what had been done to me. There's something strangely peaceful about hitting emotional rock bottom, not because it's painless, but because the truth is finally undeniable. You stop twisting yourself into knots trying to justify other people's behavior. You stop negotiating with disappointment. They told me in no uncertain terms that I wasn't welcome, and I believed them. That realization should have broken me. Instead, it cracked something open. I remember gripping the steering wheel and asking myself a simple question I'd never really asked before. Why do I keep offering my love like it's a debt I owe? I gave and gave and gave, not because I had to, but because I believed that if I was just generous enough, kind enough, useful enough, they'd finally see me as worthy. And they didn't. Because people don't love you more when you abandon yourself. They just get better at using you. It sounds dramatic, I know. But in that moment, it didn't feel dramatic. It felt true. I thought about all the times I'd said yes when I wanted to say no. All the holidays I spent biting my tongue so someone else could have a nice evening. All the times I'd gone unnoticed in a room full of people I'd poured myself out for. And then I thought about Nate. When we first started dating, I remember how confused I was by how easy he was to talk to. He didn't play games. He didn't punish me with silence or twist my words into guilt. He just listened. He believed that kindness didn't have to be earned. It just was. And honestly, I didn't know what to do with that. Because when you grow up in a family where love is conditional, where approval has to be bought or begged for, real intimacy feels almost alien. Like you don't deserve it. Like someone's going to find out you're faking it and take it all away. But Nate never made me feel small. And in that moment behind the wheel, mascara still smudged on my cheek, I realized I'd been shrinking for people who couldn't even name one thing about my actual life. They didn't know what floor I worked on at the hospital. They didn't know what books I read, or what songs I cried to when no one's around. They didn't know I'd been quietly putting away savings to buy a home one day, and they didn't care to. So why was I still trying to win their approval like it was some kind of prize? That's when I knew. I was done chasing crumbs. I wasn't going to spend another year, another minute, breaking my back to keep people comfortable while I bled out in silence. So I did something small, but powerful. I picked up my phone, opened a blank note, and started writing a list. Not of what they did wrong, but of what I would no longer do. I will not spend money to prove my love. I will not silence my needs to keep the peace. I will not show up where I'm not respected. I will not apologize for having boundaries. I will not confuse obligation with loyalty. That list became my starting point, not for revenge, but for recovery. I had no idea what the next chapter of my life would look like, but for the first time, I was sure of one thing. I was done editing myself to fit inside someone else's comfort zone. If they didn't want me at the table, fine. I'd build my own. Clarity is one thing. Action is another. After sitting in the car behind the wedding tent, still in that beige dress that made me feel like wallpaper, I knew I couldn't just walk away and pretend it hadn't happened. Not this time. Not again. I didn't want to scream or throw anything or storm the reception like some dramatic movie scene. That would have made me the villain in their story. And I was done playing any character that wasn't true to me. So I took a deep breath, got out of the car, and walked back toward the catering van like I belonged there. Because I did. I was the one who had written every check. Tara, my best friend and the owner of the bakery, was standing near the delivery tables, talking to one of her servers. She looked up and saw me coming, and her whole face changed. Concern, curiosity, and a bit of fire all flickered behind her eyes. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded once. "I will be, but I need to make a call." We stepped away from the loading area, just far enough to talk in private. I explained what Maris had said, not just the disinvitation, but the way she said it, like I was clutter, like my presence was somehow poisoning her perfect day. Tara didn't even blink. "Then we're out. I'll pack up now." I felt a surge of emotion. "Tara, I don't want to ruin anything. You're not ruining anything," she interrupted. "They made their choices. You're just responding." There's something powerful about being believed without having to explain yourself. That moment made me realize just how rarely that happened in my family. I watched as she calmly walked over to her team and gave the signal. They began collecting serving trays, folding up tablecloths, closing coolers. Quiet, efficient, no drama, just control, the kind I hadn't felt in years. Meanwhile, I texted Nate. Me. "I'm okay." Me. "Heading out soon." Me. "I'll explain everything later." He responded almost instantly. Nate. "I'm parked at the overlook down the road. Take your time. I brought you a change of clothes." Nate. "I love you." I stared at the screen, swallowing a sudden lump in my throat. That was the difference. In my family, I had to earn affection. With Nate, I was loved just for showing up. I turned back toward the tent. Guests were starting to notice something was off. Whispers floating like fog through the air. One of Maris's bridesmaids was clearly on damage control, running between tables. The DJ was fiddling with his laptop but hadn't started the music. There were no drinks being poured. No appetizers being passed. The illusion was beginning to crack. I didn't need to be there for the fallout. That wasn't my job anymore. My job was to step away, without shame, without explanation, and without rescuing people from the consequences of how they'd treated me. So I did. But before I left, I found Uncle Grant, my dad's younger brother, standing near the back of the property with a bourbon in hand. He had always been the only relative who spoke in plain language, not polished small talk. "You heading out?" he asked like he already knew. "Yeah," I said. "They asked me not to stay." His brow furrowed. "Seriously?" "They made it pretty clear." He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "Well, I hope they enjoy whatever they've got left." He didn't try to stop me. He didn't offer excuses. He just put a hand on my shoulder, squeezed gently, and said, "You did more than your part, kid." That was all I needed. I walked to my car, head high, steps slow, not out of hesitation, but intention. This wasn't a retreat. It was an exit. My choice, not theirs. And as I pulled away from the venue, I realized something. They didn't expect me to fight back. They expected the old Lena, the peacemaker, the background filler, the family workhorse. But that version of me was gone. And in her place was someone who finally understood the difference between sacrifice and self-destruction. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't petty. It was a boundary. And for the first time in my life, I knew exactly where to draw the line. I wasn't planning to go back. I was halfway down the road, maybe 10 minutes from the overlook where Nate was waiting, when my phone lit up with Tara's name. Tara. They're asking questions. Tara. Do you want me to say something or keep it vague? I pulled over. My hands gripped the wheel. People were noticing. The facade was breaking. And for the first time I realized I had the truth. Not a tantrum. Not a rumor. Just the facts. So I texted her back. Me. Tell them the catering was withdrawn by the person who paid for it. Me. If they want to know why, they can ask the bride. I didn't turn around for drama. I didn't need to watch chaos unfold. But something deep in my gut told me that I wasn't quite finished. Not yet. So I made a slow U-turn. Not out of anger, but with calm, deliberate energy. When I arrived back at the venue, things were already unraveling. Guests were standing in small clusters, murmuring. Phones were out. The DJ was packing up his gear. One of the groomsmen was on the phone, clearly trying to call in a pizza order for 100 people. I parked near the side entrance and walked in just as the tension tipped into chaos. Someone shouted from the buffet line, "There's no food!" Another voice chimed in, "The caterers left?" Who even does that at a wedding? And then I heard her. Maris. Her voice pierced the air like a fire alarm. "What do you mean they left?" She stormed across the patio in her 6-inch heels, grabbing at servers who were no longer working. Her cheeks were flushed, her hair coming loose, her perfect bride mask slipping fast. "Where's the food?" she shouted. "Where is the fucking food?" That's when someone pointed at me. "She's back. Ask her." Every head turned. Even Seth, her new husband, looked frozen, his mouth half open. The photographer stopped mid-shot. And for once, the whole room looked at me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't flinch. I just said, clearly, ask the bride why the person who paid for dinner wasn't welcome here. Gasps, murmurs. Someone whispered, "She paid for the food?" A bridesmaid said, "Wait, what?" And then Maris lost it. "You're unbelievable," she screamed, marching toward me. "You would do this? On my wedding day?" "I didn't do this," I said calmly. "You did. You told me to leave. You made it clear I wasn't wanted." "It was a vibe thing," she shouted, flailing like a kid who just found out there's no cake at her birthday. "You were making everything about you." I looked at her. Really looked. A grown woman in a designer gown, sobbing over the fact that people were holding her accountable. "You wanted me to disappear," I said. "So I did. I took the part of this day I paid for, and I left. That's not sabotage. That's a boundary." Someone near the back, I think it was Uncle Grant, muttered, "Damn right." Seth stepped forward, finally speaking. "Wait, you paid for the catering?" I turned to him, nodding. Every tray, every plate, every crumb. It was my gift, before I was told to get lost. His face changed, slowly. The color drained. Reality was setting in. Maris kept talking, but the noise had shifted. The guests weren't listening to her anymore. They were whispering to each other, eyes darting. The illusion was gone. This wasn't a fairy tale wedding. It was a car crash, and they were all watching it in real time. "I didn't think you'd actually do it," Maris muttered, her voice suddenly smaller. "I thought you were better than that." "I am," I said. "That's why I left." And then I did. I didn't wait for applause. I didn't need to hear more excuses. I turned around, walked through the doors, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Weightless. Because that moment wasn't just about food, or family, or even justice. It was about truth. And I had finally spoken mine. By the time I got to the overlook where Nate was parked, The sun was starting to set. That golden kind of light where everything looks softer, quieter, like the world is giving you permission to exhale. I got out of the car, still in that beige dress, and walked straight into his arms. He didn't say anything right away, just held me, and I didn't have to explain, because he already knew. He had packed a change of clothes for me, my favorite hoodie, a pair of jeans, and clean sneakers. I changed in the back seat of his car, and as I peeled off that wedding guest costume, it felt like I was shedding more than fabric. I was shedding years of shame, guilt, and the constant contortion I had done to fit into someone else's version of family. "Are you hungry?" he asked gently, once we were sitting together on the hood of his car. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd. "Yeah," I said. Apparently, I skipped dinner. He pulled a small box from the back seat and handed it to me. Inside were leftover cupcakes Tara had packed for us, the ones she'd rescued before leaving the venue. One was vanilla with raspberry filling. Another was chocolate with sea salt. I took a bite and nearly cried. Not because of the sugar, but because it was the first thing I'd had all day that didn't come with strings attached. We sat there in silence, legs dangling off the hood, watching the sky turn from gold to blue to purple. And I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. No performance, no tension, just peace. That's when my phone started buzzing, over and over. Missed calls, voicemails, texts. Some from family, some from wedding guests, some from people I hadn't heard from in months. "Aunt Claire, I just heard what happened. Are you okay?" "Fallon, bridesmaid. I didn't know the catering was your gift. I'm sorry, that wasn't right." "Uncle Grant, Maris is melting down." "You didn't ruin the wedding. You exposed it." I didn't respond. Not yet. I didn't need to. Because what I felt wasn't a desire to explain, it was a sense of justice. Not the kind you post about, the kind you feel in your bones. Because here's the truth. Maris got her wedding. She got her dress, her flowers, her ring, her curated photos. But she didn't get her dinner. She didn't get the fairy tale she wanted to stage. Because the person she treated like background noise turned down the volume. And while she spent her first night as a married woman fielding angry calls from guests wondering why they were served warm tap water and stale breadsticks from the nearby pizza joint, I sat on a hill, barefoot and calm, eating cupcakes beside the one person who never made me beg to be loved. And that was the victory. Not because it hurt her, but because it finally healed me. For so long, I had chased these big moments where I thought justice would come crashing in like a movie scene, people apologizing, family weeping, everything magically made right. But justice doesn't always look like that. Sometimes it's quieter. Sometimes it's a cupcake at sunset and the silence of no longer needing permission to exist. Tara later texted me a picture, a blurry shot of the reception room, half empty, candles flickering beside untouched plates. No dancing, no dinner. Just confusion and tension, trapped inside a venue paid for with someone else's sacrifices. And I realized I wasn't the one who walked away from family. They walked away from me a long time ago. I just finally stopped following. I woke up the next morning on Nate's couch, wrapped in a blanket I didn't remember pulling over myself. For the first few minutes, I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, letting it settle. I had walked away from my sister's wedding. I had taken back what was mine. I had spoken the truth out loud, in front of everyone. It had happened, and I didn't regret it. What surprised me most was how quiet it all felt the next day. No chaos, no guilt spiral, just clarity, and the strange, unfamiliar comfort of not being the one apologizing for once. I checked my phone. More messages. Dozens now. Some were passive-aggressive. Some were outright furious. But buried in the flood were the ones that mattered. Tara had sent a voice memo. "Hey, I know you're probably drained, but I just want you to know. I am so proud of you. I've seen you break your back for people who didn't deserve you, over and over. And yesterday, that was you saying, 'No more.' You didn't ruin anything. You reclaimed your peace. I'll drop off the leftovers and your cake stand tomorrow. Take care of yourself. You're not alone. Not alone. Those 2 words cracked something in me. Because for most of my life, that's exactly how I felt. Even in a crowded room, even sitting at the family table. Especially then. But not now. Nate came into the living room holding 2 mugs of coffee. Mine already fixed the way I liked it. No asking. No prompting. "Sleep okay?" he asked. I nodded. "Shockingly, yes." He smiled. "You've been carrying that weight a long time. I think your body's just relieved it can finally let go." I took the coffee from him and sat up. "They're going to spin this so hard." "They will," he said. "But people saw. People heard you. You weren't cruel, Lena. You were clear. That's what scares them." And it was true. Because when you stop begging for acceptance, people who thrived off your silence get loud. Fast. But that morning, it didn't matter what they said. Because my phone rang, and it was someone I hadn't heard from in a while. Uncle Grant. I picked up, heart racing. "Hey, kid," he said, his voice rough like always, but softer than I remembered. "Got a minute?" "Yeah," I said. "You did the right thing yesterday. Don't let anyone twist that up. I was there. I saw the whole thing. You stayed calm. You spoke truth. If people can't handle that, it's on them." I didn't realize I was crying until a tear hit my wrist. "I don't want to tear the family apart," I said, voice cracking. "You didn't," he replied. "They did that a long time ago. You just stopped pretending." He paused, then added, "Your granddad would have been proud as hell. You know that, right?" My throat tightened. I couldn't speak. "Listen," he went on. "You ever need a place to breathe, come up to the lake house. It's yours as much as it is anyone's. You need people in your corner now, and you've got me." I hung up and just sat there. I wasn't used to support like this, not without conditions, not without guilt. Later that week, one of my coworkers from the ICU, Jessie, a single mom I'd covered shifts for more times than I could count, showed up with a casserole and a bottle of wine. "I heard what happened," she said, setting the dish down. "I don't know all the details, but honestly, good for you. You deserve better." It was small, but it meant everything. And it kept happening. Friends checked in. Neighbors dropped off groceries. Even a few wedding guests, people I barely knew, sent messages saying they respected what I did. That it was brave. That it made them think about their own families. None of these people shared my last name. But they saw me. They didn't love me for what I could do for them. They loved me for who I was when I wasn't performing. And that was the greatest support I'd ever known. Family isn't who shares your blood. Family is who shows up when you stop shrinking. In the days after the wedding, the Calloway family went into full spin mode. Maris posted a picture on Instagram the very next day. It was filtered to perfection. Her in her gown, Seth holding her hand, sunset lighting like it had been made to order. The caption read, "Despite the chaos, it was still the most magical day of my life. Some people just can't help but bring drama, but love wins. Always." She even tagged the venue, the florist, and, laughably, the caterer she fired with her words. For a second I almost laughed, and then the comments started. At first, people didn't know what had happened. But as screenshots started to surface, group texts leaked, and TikTok clips began making the rounds, the truth refused to stay buried. Someone at the wedding, a guest I barely knew, had filmed the confrontation. Just part of it. Enough. Me calmly saying, "Ask the bride why the person who paid for dinner wasn't welcome here." It went viral. Not millions of views, but enough to make its way around town, enough to start conversations. And people did talk. First in DMS. "I thought that was you in the video. I'm so sorry you went through that. That was unbelievably cruel. I didn't know you were the one who paid for the food. Wow, that changes everything." She really thought no one would notice, but we all noticed. Then it reached the family group chat, the one I'd been silently removed from months ago without explanation. Uncle Grant screenshotted part of the conversation and sent it to me directly. Mom, we need to address the video. Lena has twisted the narrative and made Maris look bad. Grant. Maris made Maris look bad. Lena didn't twist anything. She just finally said what no one else had the guts to. Dad, I can't deal with this right now. Grant. Exactly. That's the problem. Apparently, even my dad, the man who had spent a lifetime avoiding every hard conversation, was no longer able to protect the family story. The silence that once shielded Maris was cracking. And it didn't stop there. Tara, who had always played nice to keep the peace, posted a simple message to her bakery's Instagram. Our team was hired to cater a wedding this past weekend. When we were informed that the person who paid the invoice was being excluded and disrespected, we made the ethical decision to step away. We stand by our values even when it's uncomfortable. Loyalty matters. She didn't name names. She didn't have to. Comments poured in. Support. Agreement. Stories from others who had been used and discarded by their own relatives. Suddenly, the wedding wasn't a celebration. It was a case study. People weren't gossiping. They were waking up, seeing patterns, connecting dots. Even Seth, poor, shell-shocked Seth, reached out to Nate privately. He asked to meet. So we did. I didn't go to gloat or get closure. I went to listen, and what he told me made my stomach twist. She told me you were moody, he said, that you hated weddings, that you were looking for a reason to ruin hers. I believed her. I mean, she's my wife. He looked down at his hands, then back up. But what I saw that night, it didn't match what she said about you. You were calm. You were honest. And everyone else? They looked like they were caught off guard by their own reflection. It hit me in that moment. Maris hadn't just tried to erase me from one day. She had spent years curating a version of me that was easier to reject. Because if I was difficult, then she didn't have to be accountable. If I was dramatic, then she didn't have to be cruel. If I was bitter, then she didn't have to be selfish. But now, the image had shattered. I wasn't the liar. I wasn't the problem. And slowly, the people around her were starting to realize it too. It didn't change everything overnight. There were still whispers. Still people who chose comfort over truth. But that didn't matter to me anymore. Because for the first time, I wasn't the one carrying the family's shame. They were holding their own now. There's a strange stillness that comes after everything falls apart. Not chaos, but clarity. A kind of silence that wraps around you like a weighted blanket, heavy, but grounding. That's how I felt in the weeks after the wedding. No big scenes, no family intervention, just space. And in that space, I started to rebuild something that had been buried for years. My own voice. I didn't go on a rant. I didn't post a tell-all. I didn't send angry emails to relatives trying to convince them I was right. Instead, I took stock. I looked at who reached out to check on me, who stayed quiet, who sent a text that wasn't about how embarrassing it all was, but simply asked, "How are you?" That told me everything I needed to know. For the first time, I realized how much of my life had been shaped by a need for conditional approval. I wasn't living for myself. I was living for damage control. Every decision I made was filtered through the question, will this make them upset with me? Will this cause a problem? Will I be blamed? But after the wedding? That question disappeared. Because here's what I finally understood. Love without respect isn't love. It's control. My family wanted my loyalty, but only if it came wrapped in silence. They wanted my sacrifices, my money, my emotional labor, but only if I asked for nothing in return. They were fine with me being generous, as long as I didn't ask to be treated like I mattered. And for years I played along, because I thought keeping the peace meant being at peace. It didn't. Keeping the peace in my family meant never challenging the people who caused the pain. It meant shrinking. It meant apologizing for making other people uncomfortable with my boundaries. It meant swallowing my hurt so they could stay comfortable in their version of reality. But when I canceled that food and said no, clearly, without cruelty, I saw how fragile their illusion really was. It shattered in seconds. Not because I broke it, but because it was never built on truth to begin with. I used to think that healing meant reconciliation, that the goal was to fix things, to make it work, to get back to some fantasy of a healthy family where everyone suddenly woke up and did better. But now, healing, for me, is clarity. It's knowing what I will and won't tolerate. It's choosing peace over performance. It's letting go of the need to be understood by people who are committed to misunderstanding me. And it's knowing that love doesn't have to hurt to be real. Nate and I talked a lot in the weeks that followed about what kind of future we wanted, what kind of family we wanted to create. And I told him something I'd never admitted out loud before. I'm scared of becoming like them. He looked at me and said, "You won't, because you see it, and you're willing to do the work they never even acknowledged." That stuck with me, so I started writing. Not a blog, not a post, just for me. Letters I never sent, reflections, stories, pages filled with the words I'd swallowed for years. And as I wrote, something began to shift. I wasn't writing as a victim. I was writing as someone who had walked through fire and survived. And maybe that's what real resolution looks like. Not revenge, not reunion, but reclamation of my story, my time, my voice. I didn't need an apology from my sister to move on. I didn't need my mother to finally admit her favoritism. I didn't need the family to rewrite the past in order to live peacefully in my present. What I needed was what I gave myself: permission. To walk away without guilt, to speak without fear, to love without needing to be small. That's my resolution. That's my peace. There's a moment after the dust settles where you ask yourself, now what? You've cut the cord, set the boundary, burned the old blueprint. But what do you do with all the space that's left behind? At first, it's unsettling. I'd spent so long operating in reaction mode, dodging guilt, over-explaining myself, trying to anticipate everyone else's needs, that when I stopped, the silence felt almost too loud. But over time, that silence became a kind of freedom, and from that freedom I started building. Not a new family, not yet, but a new version of home. Nate and I found a small house just outside the city, a fixer-upper with chipped paint, creaky floors, and a backyard that needed love. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't Pinterest perfect, but it was ours. No performance, no posing. Just real, messy beginnings. We painted the kitchen together one weekend. I remember standing barefoot on a drop cloth, covered in flecks of sage green, and feeling lighter than I had in years. "This," I told him, "feels like actual joy." He smiled and said, "That's because it is. It's not borrowed or earned. It's just yours." For the first time, I wasn't building my life around damage control. I was building around desire. I went back to work with new boundaries. I didn't overextend. I stopped covering shifts out of guilt. I didn't let the patients' families drain me like I used to. And when a young nurse on my floor confided that she felt invisible and overwhelmed, I pulled her aside and said, "Let's talk. No judgment." Because I knew that feeling. I had lived that feeling. And I wanted to be the kind of person I used to need. I started volunteering once a week at a local nonprofit that supported young women aging out of foster care. Most of them had stories far more intense than mine, but the pattern was the same. People who had to raise themselves while pretending they were fine. One girl, 17, quiet, eyes like flint, asked me why I was there. "Because," I said, "I know what it feels like when no one shows up for you. And I want to be different." She didn't say anything at first, but a week later she handed me a drawing. Rough pencil lines, but strong. It was a house, and underneath it she'd written, "Build your own." That drawing still sits on my desk. It reminds me that we don't always get the family we deserve, but we can create the world we need. I also launched a small scholarship in Grandpa Walter's name for nursing students who were first-generation college grads. Just one award a year, small but meaningful. I used a bit of the inheritance he left me after he passed. Yes, he left me something. A lot, actually. Turns out Grandpa saw everything. In his will, he wrote, "To Lena, for always showing up. For being the strong one, even when no one said thank you. You were the heartbeat of this family, even when they ignored it. Build something beautiful, on your own terms." I cried when I read it. Not because of the money, but because someone saw me. Really, truly saw me. And his last gift wasn't about wealth. It was about freedom. Freedom to stop performing. Freedom to create instead of endure. Freedom to write a future that didn't revolve around erasing myself for the comfort of others. Now, every Sunday, Nate and I host a dinner at our house. Not a formal thing, just an open door, warm food, and honest conversations. No one has to dress up. No one has to pretend. Some weeks it's friends from work. Some weeks it's neighbors, or the girl from the nonprofit. Some weeks it's just the two of us, eating leftovers in sweatpants. And every time I look around our tiny dining room table, I think, this is what family feels like. Not control, not perfection, just love. Uncomplicated, unconditional, real. It started with a short email. No greeting, no closing. Just 5 clipped sentences from Maris. "I know things got out of hand. I've been thinking about what happened. I didn't mean to hurt you. Maybe we can talk sometime. Let me know if you're open to that. No apology. No ownership." Still, it was the first message I'd received from her that didn't come through a third party or social media stunt. I stared at the screen for a while. Not angry, just curious. Curious about what she meant by "things got out of hand." Curious if she was reaching out because she genuinely wanted to repair something, or because the consequences of her behavior had finally become inconvenient. A year ago, I would have jumped at it. I would have stayed up late writing a careful, heartfelt response, hoping to keep the peace, hoping this time would be different. But now, I didn't owe her anything, except honesty. So I replied 3 days later. "I'm open to talking, but not until we're both in a space where the conversation is grounded in accountability, not defense. If you're willing to do that, I'd consider meeting. I'd also prefer to have someone present to moderate. A therapist, clergy, or neutral third party. Let me know if that's something you're actually willing to pursue. Otherwise, I wish you peace from a distance. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't emotional. It was a boundary. And honestly, I didn't expect her to respond. But she did. A week later, I got another message. She agreed to therapy. She said she'd already found someone. She even offered a few dates and said she'd cover the cost. It wasn't everything, but it was something. The session was virtual, just the two of us and a therapist named Adrian, neutral, steady, gentle, but firm. Maris did most of the talking in the beginning. She cried, said she was overwhelmed, said she felt abandoned when I left the wedding, said she didn't realize how much pressure she was under. I listened, not to validate, but to observe. And eventually, I spoke. I told her what it felt like to be her sister, what it meant to be constantly used, but never acknowledged. How painful it was to be erased, not just on her wedding day, but for our entire childhood. And this time, she didn't interrupt. She didn't excuse. She just nodded. And for the first time in our lives, she whispered the words I thought I'd never hear. "I didn't want to admit how badly I treated you, because if I did, I'd have to admit I'm not who I thought I was." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was honest, hard-earned. It didn't fix everything. One session wasn't going to undo 30 years of dysfunction, but it shifted something. We agreed to stay in touch, light contact, email, and texts for now. We weren't sisters in the way we used to be, but maybe we could become something else. Something more truthful, something more mutual. I didn't bring her back into my life completely. That would take time, and trust, and action, not just words. But I stopped feeling like I had to slam the door shut to stay safe. I could leave it cracked, on my terms. A few weeks later, I got a letter from my mom. Yes, a handwritten letter. She didn't apologize either. Not directly, but she said she'd been thinking, that she'd watched the video, that she didn't realize how much pain I was in. I read it twice, then I put it in a drawer. Because sometimes closure doesn't come from confrontation. Sometimes it comes from finally seeing your family clearly, not as villains, but as limited people who refuse to grow, and deciding you're not going to hold your breath waiting for them to catch up. Reconciliation, if it happens at all, isn't a grand reunion. It's a contract, conditional, earned, monitored. And the beauty is, I'm not desperate for it. If we build something new, it'll be from scratch, not scraps. If they meet me again, it'll be as I am now. Not the girl who begged to be loved, but the woman who learned how to love herself first. It's been almost a year since the wedding. Sometimes I forget that day even happened, and then I'll pass a vineyard, or see a post about someone's bridal party drama, and it all comes rushing back. Not with pain, not anymore, but with perspective. Because that day, for all its chaos, was a turning point. Not the end of something, the beginning. It taught me that boundaries don't make you cruel, they make you honest. And honesty, especially in a family where performance was everything, is the most radical act of love I've ever practiced. I used to think that being a good daughter, or sister, or woman meant sacrificing myself over and over, keeping my voice soft, keeping the peace, swallowing my truth so no one else had to feel uncomfortable. But now I know that love built on silence isn't love. It's survival. And I'm done surviving. I'm living. Slowly, deliberately. Not needing everything to be perfect, or even understood. Just real. The kind of life where I say what I mean. Where I don't shrink in rooms that want me smaller. Where I walk away from tables that require me to set myself on fire to keep others warm. These days I take up space in my own life, and it's not loud. It's not angry. It's steady. I take walks in the morning before work. No phone, no podcasts, just the sound of my breath and the feeling of my own company. I host dinner for people who don't need me to perform, who laugh loud and love soft and pass the bread like it matters. I go to therapy without shame. I rest. I say no. And I say yes. Not because I owe it, but because it feels true. The relationships I do have now, they're rooted in mutual respect, reciprocity. They're not perfect, but they're real. There's space for disagreement without punishment. There's space for quiet, for boundaries, for growth. Even with Maris, we're not close, but we're not pretending anymore. And honestly, that's more healing than 1,000 fake smiles. Some people ask if I regret what I did, if I feel bad for ruining a wedding, and my answer is simple. Number, because I didn't ruin anything. I revealed it. I held up a mirror, not with malice, but with clarity. And what broke that day? It needed to. Because the truth is, I wasn't angry about the wedding. I was heartbroken over the years I spent hoping that if I was just good enough, they'd finally see me. But now I see myself. That's the real ending to this story. Not the viral video, not the canceled food, but the quiet moment where I finally said, no more. No more shrinking. No more rescuing people who refuse to grow. No more mistaking sacrifice for love. And to anyone watching, anyone who's ever been made to feel like the backup singer in their own life, you don't have to stay in rooms that demand your silence. You are not selfish for walking away. You are not cruel for saying, I deserve better. You are not broken for wanting love that doesn't hurt. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to protect your peace. And when they say, we don't want you here, maybe the best response isn't rage. Maybe it's calm. Maybe it's walking away. Maybe it's whispering to yourself, then I'll go where I am wanted. And then doing exactly that. Because closure doesn't always come with apologies. Sometimes it comes with a quiet walk, a cupcake at sunset, and the courage to finally build something of your own.